Miss today's will be sure to share the resources and all the information that she has put into this after the webinar. And then we also have Kamal Amir Neni joining us today, who is a part of our National Mentoring Resource Center Youth Advisory Board. So thank you all for being here with us today, and I'll turn it over to our amazing panelists. Thank you again.
Am I one of the amazing panelists?
Yes, top 3 amazing panelists, I would say.
Oh, thank you so much. Again, Jake has done a great job in getting us going today. Of course, we're a little behind, but we're going to do our best to make these adjustments and give you the information you came to receive. It's going to be robust. Let me tell you already, we got more than enough information. So you don't have to worry about not getting the content, those things. We have more than enough information. There's going to be some fun. We're going to make some adjustments at the end, and just kind of throwing this out, maybe a little quirky at the end because one of our panelists are not available. But August and I, we're going to be throwing it back and forth for our last segment, and everything's going to work out all right. My name is Dwayne Bennett. I'm with Mentor Virginia. I'm a technical assistant consultant, and also professionally, I'm a speaker or author, if you will, world travel, those things. Then we'll bring all of that to you today in terms of this webinar, because when we talk about DEI, our first slide said it's a long game, one that requires nudges along the way. So we're going to take that same philosophy, right, today and nudge you along with information. You're going to be hearing these terms, some of these terms over and over, frameworks, systems, if you will, programming, those kind of things, so that you can use this information to apply it to the program that you have. So we're going to give you enough unique information that it won't be cookie cutter. It won't just be do this, do this. We're going to give you choices. We're going to give you depth. We're going to give you a 360 bird's eye view. But then you're going to notice on our slides, right, it's a lot of information. All right. I know adult learners, we like to read everything. We're going to summarize it for you. And then when we send out the slides, when we send out our supplements, then you're going to be able to go into depth with that. So just want to let you know, we're good in terms of time. We're going to get through everything, and we're going to be done when we say we're going to be done. Now, diversity, excellence, inclusion, right? It can be a challenging area because sometimes it's sensitive in terms of language, it's sensitive in terms of concepts, it's sensitive in terms of subject matter, and then sometimes we get triggered without even knowing it. So one just let you know, cautionary measure is that, you know, some language, some concepts, some things is not there to design to be controversial. It's not here to design to send you to one way or the other, but it's designed to give you enough information that you can receive and use what you need as you go along. So just want to throw that out. And I remember back when Floyd started, that's when kind of like the DEI movement went into full swing. And I've been working within this space. And what I found out, a lot of people have burnt out. A lot of people are not in it anymore, because when you're in a room, like I have been, giving information to people that really don't want to receive it, or really don't want to be there, or it hits them in a way that allows them in one way to know I need to make some changes, but they resist change, then sometimes that can be hard. And the messenger, right, August and myself, we're just the messengers today. We get the brunt of it, but hopefully you won't hold anything against us as messengers today. We're just delivering this information. So they told me, make sure I get that cautionary information out, make sure we start off with a bang, and make sure that we're going to get all this information out to you at the end. Now, DEI is a long game. One requires nudges along the way. Next slide. How do you define DEI? Do me a favor. Put in the chat. Now, DEI, it has a definition within itself, but more so than a definition, what are your thoughts when you see a terminology in DEI? What do you think about? What some of the terms that come to mind? What some of the things, feelings that you may have? What type of scenarios that it take you back to? Put that in the chat, and that'll give us a kind of framework, you know, for different people to see, hey, this is how I feel, this is how I see things, and this is some of my lived experiences. One thing about this area is big enough for everyone. right? It's big enough for everyone to have an opinion. It's big enough for everyone to have their own way of seeing things and their perspective. So there's no right or wrong answers. I don't think so. Today, we just want to make sure we're on the same page. I'm seeing things like cultural humility, providing access and the supports to be successful. Thank you, Brooke. Who else? David says a holistic viewpoint of the world. Deanne says person-centered, inclusive, culturally appropriate, equal access. Sherry says, I hope I pronounce your names right. Inclusive culture. If I don't, charge it to the head and not the heart. Sean says equality and inclusion. Exactly. So as you see, it's a wide variety of terminology and ways to see diversity, equity, inclusion. None of them is better than the others. All right. We just have to find our lane, our space where we can make a difference, and then set up these frameworks, set up these systems, set up these things that's going to help. Here we go. Our youth move forward to their goals, their dreams, and their aspirations. And we're going to give you some information for that today. Next slide. Now, in general, I like these definitions for me personally because they are broad enough. Here we go, to be diverse and inclusive for everyone. All right. So diversity, all the ways in which people differ. Historically, diversity, equity, inclusion have been mostly thought of as the differences between races, Black and white, and usually that's what you see. But now, as we've evolved, as we do as a country, as a global society, as we evolve in history, we know diversity is all the ways people differ. Okay, so everyone on here, hey, you got a space because we're different in certain respects. Equity, we always look at it in through the lens of fair treatment. Okay, how can I go and be fair as I put these certain things in place for people that are diverse? So we got fair treatment, access, opportunity, advancement for all people, one's identity. Cannot predict the outcome. Okay, and this is so exciting because all of these things you have mentioned in the chat. So we're on the right page as we go around, and inclusion, what a variety of people what can be involved in having not only a voice but some power. Okay, some decision making and some authority. It's just not coming from one group, one culture, one individual, one situation. Is bringing everyone together in order to get there. So this is the baseline of where we're going to start with diversity, equity, inclusion. Then we're going to break it down to another area, which I call diversity, equity, and inclusion having a baby, right? Meaning that's going to be our critical mentoring space where when our youth voice come in. Then we're going to roll into some additional frameworks, and August is going to assist with that and move through that. And then at the end, we're going to tie up with some evaluation techniques, some assessment tools, and things of that nature. Okay, next slide. Just to give another view. DEI is a term used, here we go, it describes programs. All right, people see it as a concept a lot of times, just this big thing that we throw around, but it's a term used to describe programs and policies. So it has some legs, right? It describes programs and policies that encourage the representation and participation of diverse people. Here we go. Now, I like this because, again, we're expanding this definition, right? Including people of different genders, that's diversity, races, ethnicities, abilities, disabilities, religions, cultures, ages, sexual orientations. I don't have to read everything because I know you can, but you can just put anything that you need to put in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, so that everyone, right, can feel like they have a sense of, here we go, belonging. What you're seeing these days, they're expanding how we even articulate diversity, equity, and inclusion. We add belonging on there, and sometimes we add justice. So it's not one way to see this big picture. It's what's the perspective that I as an individual are coming from? What's the perspective that I am as a corporation is coming from? And how can I use this information in order to what? I believe to better society as a whole, and this globalization of the world brings us closer together to understand that just because I look different, just because I talk different, just because I dress different, it doesn't mean we doesn't have the same goals, the dreams, and the aspirations. And I know this to be true just from a personal standpoint, having traveled at this particular point, I think about 10 countries in the world, and I think about 300 cities in all of these places. And I just got back from Nigeria a couple of weeks ago. The thing, what I'm seeing is we're more alike than different. We may have a different dialect, we may have a different language, we may have a different accent, but what I'm seeing, we are more alike than different. But in this space, what I like to see is, okay, let's find connection points. Let's find these touch points of our differences in order that we can open up conversation, is that we can open up dialogue and we can get to know each other better. And that way it makes things better for everyone that's involved. Next slide. So let me give you one or two ways that organizations in general can have a structure, right, to add or infuse DEI into their organizations. Now, again, we've been going to be talking about systems, frameworks, concepts as we go along, and it's no one right way, right? Can I get that out? It's not one right way, but it's, hey, what piece can I pull from here? What piece can I pull from there? And why can I use my creativity in this space to take my organization to its next level? All right. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at organizations. All right. It's color coded. As you see, the kind of pinkish there is for belonging. What does belonging mean? Feeling accepted as members of a group, valued and connected within the company. That's a sense of belonging. I've been in spaces, I consider myself diverse in many different ways, but I've been in different spaces. Sometimes I've worked there, I've gone to school there, but I didn't feel like I belonged because there wasn't a concerted effort, right, to make sure that I felt valued or make sure I felt connected. So I had to push my way through, but I understand when we talk about this sense of belonging. Now, when you come down to the right to the bottom, the dark blue, it says inclusion. What is inclusion? Building a work environment where everyone's thoughts, ideas, and perspectives matter. Everyone has value. Everyone has opinions. Everyone can bring something to the table to help. All right. When we move to our left, we said, hey, that black with the, I would say that's the kind of darkest blue, is ensuring that all individuals have access to the same opportunities and that they are treated fairly. That's equity, and then the diversity up top, welcoming, and the representation. All right. So this is the key. You see it's in a circle, it's never going to end. Remember, we said it's a long game. You got to nudge along the way. So if we start at our top, if we start at top right, DEI is the base. That's the base to build on. But then we got to have, what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? What's the purpose for our particular organization? Each individual organization may have a different purpose, right? And this is where the individuals come in. You can stand sometimes and fight, or you can decide this is not my battle, this is not my fight, and you can move on. Or if you feel like, hey, this is where I need to get in, then you get in. Except that your company isn't for everyone. All right. So the company may not be for everyone, and the individual that comes to the company may not be for everyone. So sometimes, trying to force a round peg into a square hole, it doesn't work, or a square peg in a round hole, it doesn't always work. Here we go again. You make an evaluation that works for you, that works for your family, works for the organization when we're talking about how we can infuse this. It has to be a conscious effort. Organizations, and we're going to see some statistics on this, organizations that are successful in creating this diverse organization, if you will, it's a conscious effort. It's intentional. It's something that's worked on consistently as we move along. And then we're going to see this a little bit more in our next example. It's got to be led by example, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get it. And then truly include your gig workers, right? And the reason why I like this slide is because when COVID hit, right, we went to a lot of remote work, and then people, when we're talking about our gig workers, our remote workers, we're not in the organization physically now. So how is DEI going to work with that? We just can't have the organizations that the people that's in the organization not involved just because you're not there. We have to put some things in place for them and then hold our organization accountable. All right. So this is a framework again. This is a system again. We can say, hey, how can I make my organization be a little more diverse, infuse some things in there? And this is what I love, the fact that in this space, I'm not saying everyone hears this, but in this nonprofit space, there's a lot of room for growth, and we can lead the way. So on both sides, from a for-profit side and a not-for-profit side, there's always room for growth. And this is just one of the frameworks in order you can use to infuse DEI into your organization. Next slide. Now we can look at it a different way. All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is more, have a little more depth to it because it's explaining, right, every pillar, every column in the system to determine, okay, how this works for each individual. And number one, this is a word I've been using so much, I'm probably overusing it, right? In the last, I'm probably overusing it in the last, we'll say the last year or so, nuance. Because it's not a clear correlation when we talk about all of these terminologies, when we talk about diversity, when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about LGBTQIA, when we're talking about Native Americans, when we talk about, it's a little bit of us and a little bit of them and a little bit of we and a little bit of they and all of us. So it's nuanced when you take a look at these concepts and things. So it doesn't take a lot sometimes. There's subtle things we need to look at. So a nuanced understanding of the root causes. So as a company, as a program, as a mentoring organization, as a nonprofit, if I'm going to infuse diversity, action, inclusion, belonging concepts in, what's the root cause for my company not to be there or not want to get there? So we got to start with what's the root causes, right? So it's got some other things there. And then we go to what? This is the key right here. You got to set clear and quantifiable aspirations, particularly the clear course for change, right? It can't be nebulous. It can't be so conceptual that nobody can grab onto it and know what to do. All right, so it has to be clear, it has to be defined, and it has to be focused on some KPIs, some key performance indicators, and we'll talk about those at the end. Number 3, set initiative as a core business priority. Now, this is the thing that as I'm doing my research, as I'm going to organizations, I talk to people, the organization that is coming down from the leadership, they're more successful. The organizations that is trying to be pushed up by the employees is more of a challenge. So if you're looking for success, hold senior leaders accountable for outcomes, right? Outcomes, not necessarily activities, because we can have activities. I mean, hey, if we want to have, say, 20 more female employees, right, then we may put our advertisements out for that to be attractive to females. But however, if that's all we do and don't go back to see that we've gotten our numbers, then what? We're not holding outcomes for, we're not holding our seniors accountable for outcomes. Sherry says yes to senior leaders buy-in. Thank you, Sherry, for that. Number 3, develop solutions that address the root causes. You got to kill it by root. My mom has a plant in front of her house, and she tried to get rid of it. So every year I pull it all out and I get down to the roots as far as I can, and I feel like I got it, but then it comes back up, right? What haven't I done? I haven't got down to the root cause of this thing as to why it's growing, but we're going to get there. Same thing for diversity, excellence, equity, and inclusion. We got to get down to the root cause and then put some things in place. And then I think number 5 is, let's skip number 4. Integrate changes into key processes. All right, the key processes, I mentioned that is not only HR, right? It's also once you're in the building, what are your managers doing? What are your assistant managers doing? What are your supervisors doing? What are the people in the organization doing, right, in order to infuse this in that way in order to get there? I see you all excavate those root causes there. We got to get them out there, right? And then finally, define our key performance indicators. What's going to be the things that we use to determine whether or not we're going to make progress? So it just can't be an idea, a president gives a speech or the HR gives a speech. It has to be some quantifiable things that has to be done in order to change this culture so we can move it forward. Remember we say what? Nudge by nudge, day by day, inch by inch, and then we'll consistently get there. So these are 2 different frameworks, if you will, models that you can use at your organization in general in order to start to do what? To make it more diverse, to be more equitable, to be more inclusive, and more to be belonging. And let's see, Jacko said, holding senior leaders accountable and encourage employees to contribute and have input. 100% on point. All right, next slide. Now, these are some statistics about diversity in the workplace. Some good, some not good, but these are just facts from the information we got. They're not always that good. In 2021, 61,331 total workplace discrimination cases. This is a key performance indicator. We got to bring this down as a whole. All right, we got to bring this down as a whole. And some things that we talked about just now in terms of infusing this diversity, equity, inclusion into the organization, that's going to help bring these numbers down. 41% of LGBTQ plus workers have experienced unfair treatment, right? We always talked about fairness. We have to work on that. 49% of transgender workers report being fired, not hired due to being trans. Again, this could be because we don't have policies in place. We don't have the awareness in place. We don't have the education in place. We don't have the root causes in place. So some of these statistics about diversity in the workplace, what it tells us, we need these processes. We need these frameworks. We need someone to step forward. This is just not an area that we're going to talk about, like I said, starting with Floyd, and then once all that's over with, then it's over. It's never going to be over until we get this number down from 61,331 to 0. All right. So we do need these practices. We do need these things to be infused into our organization, and this is going to help our organizations overall. All right. Next slide. Effects. Now, this, some people, they don't like when I say this a lot of times, but this is what I find it to be true. From the standpoint of business, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, it's not for the employees. It's not for the employees. It's a business construct that businesses have learned that if we have more diversity, equity, inclusion programs and focus on it, these are the things that happen for us. So from a business standpoint, if we're looking for buy-in, if we're looking for whether or not, here we go, I have an interest of my company doing better, then the effects of diversity, equity, inclusion is always helpful. Companies with inclusive cultures have 22% lower turnover. All right, 22% lower turnover. What does that mean? If the people are coming to work, right, then you get higher productivity. So if you get higher productivity, then the bottom line gets what? Bigger as we go along in terms of profits. So why am I talking about the effects? Why are we talking about this? Because if we're talking about buy-in, and if you're a pioneer and you're on the cutting edge with your organization and you've been finding you're hitting the glass ceiling, let them know there's some statistics that say, hey, if we do this thing right, the whole organization gets better. Things start to flow. Things start to move better for everyone. And here we go, the profits. Right? The profits. That's what companies want on the profit side. The profits go up. Companies with racially and ethnically diverse teams are 30% what? More likely, right? These financial returns. These are things that when I was having a conversation, I think we're having a conversation when we just had a diversity, equity, inclusion workshop at Mentor VA, and we were talking about buy-in and how do you get companies to buy in? How do you get the leaders to buy in? These things here that we can use and we can take back as tools in our conversations to help the company buy in. And then because here we go, leadership is beholden to what the stakeholders and the investors, then these things will help us as we go along in order to get there. All right, gender parity across workplaces would increase global. Look at this. Gender parity across workplaces would increase global, the entire world GDP by 26%. 26%. So the diversity, equity, inclusion is just not for programs. It's just not for companies. It's in order, and it probably sounds soapboxish and maybe, kind of with violence and things. This is needed to make this world a better place. We're giving you some techniques. We're giving you some frameworks. We're giving you some information to take back now in order to help your organization get better. Now, this is what I want to do right now. I just want to stop. Now, I want you to think about what's your intention for the webinar today. Okay, our minds work better when we give it an intention, right? So if your intention is to just get information, right? If your intention is just to get information, then it will focus on the information you need. If your intention is to get particular frameworks for that I can actually put into my program, I can put into my mentoring program, I can put into my organization, then you will see the frameworks that you need. If there's some changes, right? Have an intention as to how you want to use this information that you're being given today, And we're going to get the slides on those things and then move forward with that as we continue. So I'm going to take a stop right here, give you about 10 seconds, 15 seconds to think about what am I trying to get out of this webinar today. Write that down. I want to encourage you to write it down, and you can be able to use that as you go forward. Okay, next slide. I want to personally thank everyone for coming out today. I see we have 117 participants so far. That's awesome. That's awesome. We can make a change with just 117 of us pulling in the right direction, putting in a direction that we can make this thing move. All right, here we go. Some key data points. Create a framework for DI communications. 50% percentage point. Black employees' belief in their employer's commitment to diversity compared to white employees. So anytime you see a percentage that's not 100, right, we can turn it into what? A positive or a negative, right? So we want this number to go up. We want Black employees to have a belief, right, that there's more diversity than our white employees. This is a key performance indicator. This could be one thing that you can use as a benchmark. This could be one thing that you can use there. This is one thing you can use as a survey. This is one piece of information that will help you move the organization along. Next slide. These next couple of ones will be key performance indicators, right? 20% of organizations have gender representation goals. Now, you already know the answer. So if only 20% have gender representation goals, then how much room do we have for improvement? How much room do we have for improvement? Put it in the chat. If only 26%, right, have gender representation goals, how much room do we have for improvement? It's a percentage. What are we doing? We're building accountability into DI. Let's see. 74%. Thank you, David. It wasn't a trick question. It's an easy question. But what I'm saying, what that shows is there's room for growth. There's room for improvement. As they say, we can get in where we fit in. So everyone can be involved in these strategies as we go along, but it's the way that we interpret these things and the way that we can use them. This is what we hope that you go get out of our presentation today. Next slide. Another key data point. 21% of organizations have a senior role fully dedicated to DEI. 21%. So the opposite is what? I think I got my numbers right. 89 or 71. Somebody help me with my numbers. That much space for improvement in the senior role of having a dedicated DEI representative there, right? There's room for improvement. And these things also for you, as you go back into your organization, right? Could be profit or nonprofit. This could be a space that you say, you know what? I just want to work in this space. I want to help in this area. This is something I feel connected to. This is something that I feel important to. It's not for you to tackle every area, but the reason we set the intention so you can find what you feel good about, that aligns with your goals, your dreams, and your aspirations, and this is going to help you make a difference as we go along. All right. Next slide. I'm gonna give you a couple more data points, and then we're going to slide into critical mentoring, and then we're going to slide into some more frameworks. All right. 16% of organizations take an intersectional approach to understand employees' experiences. So if it's only 16%, again, 84% room for improvement, right? We're talking about understand how people experience culture differently depending on their identity. Again, right? There's room for improvement. Next slide. 33% of organizations analyze promotions by race and ethnicity. Now, this is not the only way you can analyze promotions, but this is a way to determine where the organization is at a particular time. This is a KPI, a key performance indicator. This could be a benchmark. This could be a goal. This could be something that we can actually set to move forward in this space. Next slide. And I know I'm moving fast. Remember, I told you we wanted to give you this 360 bird eye view so you can go down into it deeper after our webinar and find the spaces that works for you. Now, sometimes we look at an organization from the standpoint of diversity, equity, and inclusion and try to figure out from there. Let's just do the reverse. The opposite of diversity and inclusion is, here we go, marginalization and intolerance. And if you've ever felt marginalized, if you felt that you were just tolerated and not celebrated, now you understand the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion, or if you've heard someone talk about it, now you get what? The feelings. Now you get the understanding why it's important. Now you get why this is a needed focus, if you will. This is a needed philosophy. This is a needed concept in our society. So the opposite of diversity and inclusion is what? Marginalization and intolerance. So I wanted to give you the, if you will, the yin and the yang, right? One side to the and the opposite side. And a lot of times from an intellectual standpoint, this helps us to understand these concepts a little bit better. All right, next slide. Now here we go. Diversity, including trends. Good some things. Evolving remote workforce, enabling diverse gender identity expression, multi-generational workforce, eliminating unconscious bias, gearing up for systematic change. Just didn't want it to be negative. Just didn't want to be like, okay, we got to improve everything. Just wanted to show we are making progress. We just got to keep on going. We just got to keep on going. And hopefully today you're finding a way that you can get in there. You find a way that it's aligned with your personal goals, and we can move forward. Next slide. Hiring diversity professionals is going better. Increased transparency in goals is going better. Supporting employees' mental health is going better. Looking beyond just tokenism, looking meaning just we just hiring people just to fill spots. Look there. So things are getting better. I wanted to bring some hope, bring some sunshine in the space. It's not a bad space. It's not the worst space, but we're what? We're nudging along. We're nudging along. Next slide. So we got this overall view, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. And then how do we bring it down from this overall view into our mentoring space? Here we go. It's called critical mentoring, right? What does the research tell us about critical mentoring? Now, I made a mistake. I say what does the research tell us about critical mentoring, but I didn't give you the definition. So what I'm going to do is in the chat, I'm going to put the definition of critical mentoring. I think I'm going to be able to do this. Let's see. And as we get this, we're going to see this is a needed area with that. All right. So we got the definition of critical mentoring in our chat, and I also will read it out to you. Critical mentoring provides the tools we need as mentors. Here we go. And youth workers, all right? Mentors and youth workers. So you don't have to be a mentor, but it can be in a youth program. Critical mentoring provides the tools we need as mentors and youth workers to create, here we go, programmatic, we've been talking about program, right? Programmatic spaces that support young people as they develop into themselves, that allow them to ask difficult questions, that provide them with opportunities to find their own voice, and that supports them as they work toward a better future. What are we saying? We're saying in this mentoring space, in terms of this DEI space, remember I say like diversity, equity, inclusion, critical mentoring, kind of like having a baby. We got our youth now thinking about at an earlier age these critical concepts. Next slide. These critical concepts. And our youth, we have to give them more, I want to say it, more credit for probably being maybe smarter, maybe being able to comprehend bigger subject matter earlier than we could have because the things evolve, and think that these things are important to them. These things are important to them. I remember always hearing it from adults, and if some of you all are familiar with this, you can give a thumbs up or whatever. The adults always said, what do as I say, not as I do. Do as I say, not as I do. Within that statement is a conflict, because you may be doing different things, right, than you tell me to do. So how am I supposed to grasp that? How am I supposed to move forward with that? This critical mentoring concept says, hey, our youth now, they can be involved in these bigger spaces in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging than we think they have. And again, these are frameworks. These are frameworks, meaning I can have a framework of critical social analysis, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, and we can go deeper in that. We can have collective identification. That can be a framework, a curriculum, or program. We can go deeper in that. Political efficacy or motivation, and we can go deeper in that. Or critical action, we can go deeper than that. So we can go across, right, as a framework, or we can go what? Down as a framework. Again, how do I infuse these concepts into my youth program or my mentoring program. It's many different ways, and we wanted to just to give you a snippet of each one. Critical social analysis, what does that speak to? The envision and work towards a more equitable and just future for youth. Okay, so we are looking at our youth and we are talking to them through the lens of what's going on socially, what's happening out there in the world. How do you see it in the world? It's okay to have a viewpoint. And as the critically conscious mentor, now we're discussing things at a younger age that'll help change. Remember those statistics? Those statistics as we go along, because now our youth have an opportunity to receive this information earlier. Okay, so critical social analysis, we're looking through a social lens, and we are looking at, that could be a curriculum, that could be a program, that could be a focused area, that could be a framework. All right, now collective identification, that's good. And I think collective identification is good in a group mentoring model, meaning we got one, maybe have one or two mentors, and we have 5, 6, 7, 8 mentees. Then what are the things that we see together? What are the things are like? What are the things that we can grasp together, and we can work through those concepts? All right, political self-efficacy. That's saying from a political perspective, am I as a youth, do I want to be engaged in the program? Do I want to be involved in the political system? All right, because some people, they're in the system, they're not. Let's talk about some reasons. And finally, what is the action we're going to take in this space once that we get these concepts going? So we're flowing into what? We had our general information. Now we're breaking it down a little more to critical mentoring, breaking it to the mentoring space. And now we're going to be flowing into some more frameworks. Next slide. To kind of sum it all up, we talked about our activity, the social interactions. We talked about our relationships, the interpersonal ties. We talked about, and I'm loving now that that mentoring is my time. I'm running up on my time. I got my clock here. That mentoring is it's an evidence-based intervention, meaning we can put mentoring into a space and we can get positive outcomes. We can get better student achievement. We can get better grades and get better communication, right? Then we talked about the government being involved in policy and how they can put things into place. And finally, society as a whole and their positive perceptions of youth mentoring, right? Mentoring used to be just to be about hugs, but now we know it's an intervention that really we can move forward to with that. So we're going over to now, next slide, to our DEI in youth mentoring. And what I want to do is, after we get through this last slide, I'm going to turn it over to August, and he's going to go further from there. But I just want to take this time to let you look at this last slide for a minute. What is clear? Looking across all these case studies, the mentor are faced with two critical tasks, right? So we're the mentors, and even though we may not be a specific mentor, we the program directors, we the executive directors. If we're the ones that's putting these programs and things in place, engaging young people in critical reflection, questioning, and combining that with supported action. So once mentors help youth to see the world, here we go, with new eyes, they must help them use that gift in meaningful and empowering ways. So we went from diversity, action, inclusion to what? To critical mentoring concepts. And now we'll have August talk about DEI youth mentoring.
Thank you, Dwayne. Amazing. All right, you can get to the next slide. My name is August Haven. I'm a consulting project manager at Mentor Indiana. And I'm so glad to be with you all today. And thank you so much for your patience and sticking it out and still being on this webinar with us. We're glad to share some space with you. So I'm going to talk about kind of DEI in youth mentoring and how some of these frameworks that Dwayne kind of introduced and gave an overview of could show up kind of operationally in an organization and working with youth. So I am going to talk about anti-racism a little bit, the pillars of white supremacy culture and their antidotes. And that's where we're going to spend the most amount of time, just because there's some really practical there's some just practical concepts that could be valuable and maybe even new for you to engage with and think about how to kind of pull those takeaways and implement them into your own organizations and into your own work. LGBTQIA affirmation and mentoring, neurodiversity and disability justice, microaggressions and microaffirmations, and some takeaways. And I'm going to acknowledge, we have like what, 32, 33 minutes left with hopefully some time for some Q&A. And I see some really awesome questions and engagement in the chat as well. So thank you all. I do not claim to be the expert in all of these. Of course, I'm just going to share kind of some, tools and resources that have been helpful for me in my own journey and could be helpful for you all as well. You can kick it to the next slide. Okay, so anti-racism in youth mentoring. I am also going to drop this definition of anti-racism in the chat. So we're working off of kind of a shared definition. It's a process of actively countering the existence and impact of all forms of racism, including personal, interpersonal, systemic, and structural. So in mentoring, this requires acknowledging and confronting, and then interrupting the ways that racism, colorism, and kind of those compounding marginalized identities shows up in the workplace, in relationships between adults and youth, and then facilitating youth and mentor critical consciousness. So it's also about, equipping people on their own kind of journeys and unpacking kind of the excavation that Dwayne was talking about, identifying root causes of some of these, the discrimination that we see the impact of, and really doing some digging and figuring out what's the root cause of that. How do I kind of undo that internally as a way of informing them the way that I show up in the world. And then supporting positive identity development in youth. So, we know that mentoring can be super, super helpful for people to just see even like in future potential versions of themselves reflected in their mentors. So to get to see, somebody who maybe has an identity that's marginalized, see an adult with that identity, making it and investing in them and being a person that they can look up to. And then involving mentors and mentees as active agents and partners. And you can kick it to the next slide. A couple statistics. I'm going to really sum these up in, there's been a few studies that have shown that short-term mentoring relationships are ones that end kind of prematurely or before the intended agreed upon time. That is often because of some unaware biases, negative stereotypes, or just lack of skills to kind of bridge the cultural differences between mentors and mentees. And it's also been found that folks who only engage in kind of short-term mentoring or have little to no experience in mentoring are more likely to express racist views about families and youth, which shows kind of the power of relationships. So studies have found, that those who do have really long-term mentoring relationships, they're able to sustain, and that, some of the impact of racism can be seen from a front row seat. Those folks are the ones who really are able to kind of gain a really deep and personal understanding of the impact of racism. And then that motivates folks' involvement in political activism, in kind of, equipping and educating those around them as well. Next slide. So this is where we're going to spend the majority of my time, because Tema Okun's work has been extremely influential in particularly equipping people who are white or people who benefit from white supremacy and kind of understanding how these cultural pillars are kind of embedded throughout society and their impact. And then she also has done research that identifies kind of antidotes to those pillars of white supremacy culture. It's kind of a term that she coined. So she's an author, an educator, and activist, and she's developed and published works on white supremacy and its impact. And she does a good job, which is she's a white woman, or at least white passing, and she does a really good job at kind of very explicitly acknowledging all of the people of color who have informed her work. And kind of taken some responsibility of her being a person to kind of call in the other white and white passing folks and equip them with kind of more awareness and then some antidotes to the impact of white supremacy culture while still giving credit to folks who have informed her work. And I do just want to acknowledge, obviously these pillars are non-comprehensive, they're contextual, they are there. I imagine that there will be ones that you may have seen or interacted with in your own worlds, and I welcome you to think about those. This is not an exhaustive list, and this is specifically built on white, middle, and upper class values and norms. So I'm going to walk through these pillars. The first is perfectionism. And some of the antidotes are a culture of appreciation. So think about in your own organization, how can you recognize and celebrate accomplishments authentically, having a learning organization where perfectionism is not something that's kind of celebrated, but progress is celebrated instead.
Yeah.
And then separating a person from a mistake that they may make. So being able to not make everything personal, essentially. Thank you, Dwayne. I appreciate that. That was a nice encouragement.
I'm paying attention.
Thank you. The second is a sense of urgency. So some of the antidotes here are just building really realistic work plans and productivity expectations. We can really easily kind of make a direct connection to the impact that a capitalist society has on kind of the expectations within our organization and the expectations of being an employee. So moving with long-term impact in mind, rather than hyper-focusing on short-term results, wellness above productivity. That's a whole sermon, just that, just that bullet point. And then a willingness to shift timelines and deadlines to increase inclusivity. So there might be times where, the contribution or opportunity for contribution from others can be compromised if there's too much of a focus on getting to the outcome. So being kind of willing to shift timelines so that folks can contribute and their voices can be heard. And I also want to name the sense of urgency also has a tendency to show up in activism work. So even as organizations are thinking about how do we fully integrate DEI, how do we make ourselves a very DEI forward organization, there can be a tendency to want to do that really urgently. I think we saw a lot of that summer 2020, where folks were wanting to put out statements and update their values and look at their hiring practices all of a sudden. And not that wasn't called for, but it has been called for a very long time. And so I think sometimes the urgency can feel a little bit flippant and can be at the expense of really sustainable change. Next slide. Defensiveness. This is a tough one. So some of the antidotes here are understanding the link between defensiveness and fear. So when, even very interpersonally, when you notice yourself getting defensive about something, maybe someone is describing an experience that they had, where maybe you had an impact on them that you did not intend to have or something, really taking a moment to ask yourself, what am I afraid of losing? What am I protecting by being defensive? Because if you're being defensive, you're defending something. So taking just a moment to step back and look at that and see, is that something that's really under attack here or is it not? And if it is, then rather than being reactive, just take a minute to think, how do I actually protect whatever in me is feeling, unsafe right now?
Yeah,
and then naming defensiveness when it's a problem, just acknowledging it can go a long way. And the celebrating, facilitating, participating in open dialogue. So welcoming contributions from others, even if those don't end up being the ones that kind of stick. And then discussing ways that defensiveness or resistance can kind of get in the way of progress. And then taking a posture of learning always, so just kind of a posture of being open to our minds changing. And acknowledging, this is one of my favorites, it's a favorite as in this really resonates with me. Acknowledging the invisible nature of privilege and power to those who hold it. So privilege often is not a felt experience, but oppression is.
That's good.
Next slide. Quantity over quality. That is the fourth pillar. So including process goals in planning so that you can really identify how you're making progress, again, rather than just being focused on kind of an outcome or productivity measures. Ensuring organization has a value statement and that you express how you want to do your work and not just what you want to do. And then make that a living document so people can kind of interact with it and incorporate it into their day-to-day work. And so people can change it when the time might call for that. And then learn to recognize times when you need to get off of the agenda that you had set forth to address some underlying concerns. So again, it can kind of be tied to that theme of almost like a over fixation or over value on kind of production, sometimes at the expense of the process. Next slide. Worship of the written word. So this is one that I would also acknowledge that this is beyond, you know, some of these you could certainly see a pretty distinct dichotomy between kind of Black American experience and like whiteness in the way that it shows up here, as in the US. This is one that I would say is global. Worship of the written word, that pillar of white supremacy culture, some of the antidotes here are analyzing how people inside and outside of the organization get to access and share information. So just kind of interrogating, you know, who has access to what,
Right.
And why? Is there a way to kind of increase that where it might need to be increased, and be willing to acknowledge where some of the ways that we value operating in, you know, a capitalist society, even a society that's very reliant on things like technology, on things like being able to read grant proposals so that you can submit something and get the money that you need to work with the kids that you want to work with. You know, there's kind of gatekeeping at every level of that. So identifying, you know, which things need to be written down, coming up with alternatives, alternative ways to document, and then ensuring that everything can be clearly understood, is written in accessible language, and then can also be adapted to different learning styles. So, you know, making sure that things are not only, if I were to just give you this presentation and Dwayne and I didn't talk about it at all,
Right.
I bet people will probably not retain as much. Maybe they're not retaining, maybe they're not retaining by us talking about it either, but at least like the process of engaging through multiple means, by looking at something and hearing something, you know, find ways to do that for information that can be really, that's really important. Right, and then only one right way. So some antidotes to that are accepting that there are many ways to get to the same goal. Once a group has made a decision, honor it and see what you can learn from taking that direction, even and especially when it's different from the direction that you would have chosen.
That's good.
And then when working with communities from a different culture than yours or your organizations, acknowledge that you have learning to do. And never assume that you or your organization knows what's best for the community, especially without meaningful relationships with that community. So be really conscientious of who is deciding things for whom. And then example, involve mentees and mentors in the decision-making. So uplift the, you know, lived experience, value lived experience, and when possible, involve those most impacted by a decision in the decision-making. Paternalism. Ensure everyone knows and understands who makes what decisions in your organization. Ensure everyone knows and understands their level of responsibility and authority. It can be very frustrating where you think that maybe you have the power to make a certain decision and then you try to do it and then, you know, a consequence happens or backlash happens and it feels like you were kind of, I don't know, like set up for failure in a way or something. That can be a really challenging experience. So making sure that there's just like role clarity, and if you're a person with influence within your organization or with even in your mentoring program, then see if there's ways that you can open up access to decision-making and power for people who might not traditionally have it. So really decentralizing power.
That's good.
Either or thinking. So notice the use of either or language and even just a personal challenge for myself, making a conscious effort to find more than two alternatives. So be creative and don't kind of compromise the complexity of the world and of people by only identifying two ways to do something. So notice where you might be oversimplifying something, especially when there's kind of urgency in the decision-making process. I think that's where it shows up most, because where pressure is put on us to just move forward and make a decision. And that's where we can really kind of compromise the process of acknowledging many options and slowing down and seeing, even involving other people in the decision-making. Next slide. Power hoarding. So the antidotes here are including power sharing in your organization's value statement, embed it in processes and practices up and down the organization, up and down the program, within your relationships with mentors. If you're a mentor, within your relationships with mentees. If you're a TA provider, within your relationships with organizations. Discuss what good leadership looks like, and invite other people to share their understanding of good leadership and what they imagine that to be, what sort of leadership they would thrive under. Invite people to share that with you, especially if you're a leader. And then keep the focus on the mission and not individual success. And so, ensure that there's kind of collective credit when there's an accomplishment. Fear of open conflict. This one can also be quite culturally bound because, I think we could all probably take a minute to just think about our family contexts. We may have either come from a family that talked about everything at the dinner table or talked about nothing at the dinner table and avoided it. And then maybe that's the stuff that you bring to your therapist later on in life. And sometimes that's, there are some like themes and kind of, sometimes it's racially bound, sometimes it's not, sometimes it's ethnically bound, sometimes it's not. But plan just within your organization and within your programs, plan for how conflict will be handled before it arises so that you have some parameters in place. And then distinguish between being polite and avoiding hard issues. You can still give respect to people while challenging them. And then learn to recognize conflict as generative, and don't police how it's being engaged. Don't police how it's being engaged, especially white folks. Don't police how people of color are engaging in a discussion where you might be feeling a sense of conflict. That is a very common interaction. And then once a conflict is resolved, take a minute to reflect and get some feedback on how it could have been handled differently. Individualism, we're almost there. Utilize teamwork and collaborative approaches where possible. Ensure that organizations are working towards shared goals. So ensure that, even leaders of organization can have a vision. Make sure that's a shared vision. Make sure that there's buy-in from the rest of your staff for that vision. Make sure you communicate it so you get a chance to kind of gather input on, are we all envisioning this the same way? How does this need to change and shape? And inviting other people into the process of shaping that vision, all the way from an organization's mission and vision down to kind of how, what activities you might do with that mentor. Or if you're a TA provider, what the organization's desires are and who all has that vision been shaped by. Take accountability as a group where possible and take credit as a group where possible. Create a culture where people bring problems to the group, just kind of a comfort level with like, address something. And then use staff meetings as a place to solve problems and not just report activities if there's space for that. And next slide. Objectivity. So antidotes to this pillar are acknowledge everyone has a worldview. Worldviews affect how we show up. None of us are the exception. Me too, you too. Objectivity is a myth. Particularly related to people and culture. So, we're all in the mentoring or youth service space in some way. No one is objective. Challenge yourself to sit with discomfort when people are expressing or presenting themselves in an unfamiliar way to you. So again, kind of the example that I talked about people policing the way that others are engaging with a conversation, but maybe their tone of voice, their volume, the way that they're expressing themselves, the way they're using their hands, things like that. Take a minute to challenge yourself and not be reactive or kind of impose your own kind of cultural assumptions and norms onto the way that that person is behaving.
That's good.
And then assume everyone has a valid point and work to understand what it is. All right. And then the right to comfort, antidotes to this one. This is the last pillar that we're going to talk about today. And I do want to just encourage folks to engage with Tema Okun's work, especially white folks. So it's, her work is linked in right here to this PowerPoint slide. You'll get it. You'll get the references along with this slide deck as well. So I encourage you to dig into some of her work. So last but not least, right to comfort. Antidotes are understand that discomfort is at the root of all growth and learning. as inconvenient as that may seem sometimes, or as that might feel sometimes.
Mhm.
Welcome it within boundaries of safety, and then deepen your own political analysis of racism and oppression, to develop a strong understanding of your personal experiences, and kind of how that fits into this larger picture. And then my personal addendum as a white person to other white folks, at white people, don't take everything personally. Not everything is about us. Next slide. This is just kind of a list of, questions that that I find arising in me as I engaged with some of Tema Okun's work in these pillars of white supremacy culture. So I encourage you to, think about some of these. Feel free to drop some of your kind of initial thoughts in the chat. Which pillars stand out most? Which do you see is prevalent within your organization? Which do you feel challenged by personally? What would you add or change about these pillars? And then which antidotes do you want to commit to? Both personally for your own personal growth, as well as even commit to kind of advocating for dismantling in your organization. All right, so I did promise that we were going to get to some content around LGBTQ plus affirmation youth mentoring as well. This is just going to be kind of a resource that I share with you. There's tons and tons and tons of resources. Mentor National has put out incredible tools and resources on kind of LGBTQ plus inclusion within mentoring organizations. The Gender Unicorn is one of my favorite resources, merely because it puts everything on this spectrum. So everything from gender identity, I identify as transmasculine, as a trans man, but where I would situate myself in gender identity is probably not identical to where anyone else in the world would situate themselves. And I think it kind of challenges that concept of putting people in groups and then kind of making assumptions based on that group. Gender expression, the way that people externally express their gender. So the way people show the world how they feel. And then sex assigned at birth is, what doctors told you were when you were born. And then physical attraction, that's kind of within the bucket of what we name as sexual orientation, but I do also want to acknowledge not everyone experiences sexual orientation. Some people only experience emotional attraction to folks. And so acknowledging all of those are also within a spectrum. This is a really good way to just kind of do a little bit of your own learning, kind of assumption challenging about where you even fit within this community, where you would situate yourself, and then use that to just kind of allow people to tell you who they are and not be as complex as we are as humans. Next slide. Briefly touching on neurodiversity and disability justice. Disability justice was a framework that was coined by two queer women of color, and then kind of taken and ran with and informed by a few others. Mia Mingus's work is one that I would definitely recommend. Really just this framework understands that all bodies are unique, essential, equally valuable. They have strengths, they have needs, no matter where you fit yourself within kind of the disability community or neurodiverse community. You all have needs, you all have strengths. All bodies are powerful, not despite the complexities, but because of them. And then all bodies are confined by ability, race, gender, sexuality, class, nation state, religion, and more. And we cannot separate them. And, the histories of white supremacy and ableism cannot be distinguished, essentially. These roots run deep. Some of those pieces of white supremacy culture, a lot of the antidotes, you can make a case for directly impacting kind of, an organization's inclusion of people with disabilities and people with neurodivergence as well. The one thing that I really want to name on this slide is the very end. So these systems condition us to see one type of person as normal, or kind of the highest standard of being human, and then condition us to see everything that deviates from that as dangerous. And then we operate and move based on that understanding, based on that fear. And so disability justice really just kind of challenges and undoes that basic assumption that there's one ideal way to be a person. And microaggressions, everyday, subtle, intentional, or often, intentional or often unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias. So then I just want to spend a couple minutes on micro affirmations and micro supports. So micro supports are kind of small gestures of inclusion and care. They could include, something very simple and something kind of covert, or they can include something very explicit and is really just kind of a nod at you belong here and I see you as human. So a few examples, something as simple as hanging a Black Lives Matter flag at your organization can go a long way. It sounds so trivial, but it really does a lot to just communicate like what side people are on. Celebrate Juneteenth and other non-white centric holidays. Require anti-racism training for staff and mentors. Ensure that intake forms have very inclusive language around how people kind of self-identify based on race and ethnicity. And then think about, what would you add? And then next, around LGBTQ plus inclusion, add pronouns to your email signature, to your Zoom name, to your name tag, to the way that you introduce yourself. Ask mentees what their name and pronouns are and in what context you should use those. So particularly for gender diverse folks, you might be working with youth who it's safe for them over here to use a certain name instead of pronouns, but it might not be safe when I make the phone call to mom. And so inviting the kid to kind of tell me where they want me to use what name and pronouns. And then provide support and education around anti-LGBTQ plus legislation, acknowledging the mental health impact of political attacks. This is for essentially every person with a marginalized identity at some point has had to deal with, I'm showing up at work after a day of having my rights challenged in the Supreme Court last night or whatever the case may be. Yeah. And kind of being just aware of that and extra sensitive to the impact and mental health toll that might be taking. And then ensuring all of your intake forms have inclusive language and let people self-identify their gender, their sex assigned at birth, their name preference, whatever they might want to tell you about themselves. Make sure there's a place for them to communicate that. Mm-hmm. Slide. Okay. And then microaffirmations around neurodivergence and people with disabilities. So just having fidget toys and stimming toys in your programs is amazing. ADA compliance, make sure people have access to the space. Translation services, people who make sure you have ASL interpreters. We had talked about if that was even an option for this webinar and we're able to get it set up, that can go a long way. And then always provide multiple avenues for engagement. And then have youth agency over the types of activities that they want to do. Not everybody has access. We might even assume that a kid has access to engaging in a certain type of activity, and we don't know that they don't. So just invite them into kind of the decision-making process for what sort of activities they feel safe in doing and want to do. Yeah, next slide. One quick resource that I just want to kind of show you, and then you will be given as a takeaway. The Johari window, my colleague Monica Mendoza introduced me to this, and it is super, super helpful in just kind of building some self-awareness as a staff member, showing up in an organization, and you invite coworkers of your choice, and maybe those who you interact with most, to fill out this list of all positive adjectives, and they essentially just indicate, here are the ones that I see August demonstrating very regularly. And then you fill it out for yourself. And then once you have both of those results, then you can actually kick it to the next slide. And I'll show you, Monica dropped results into a table that then kind of identifies, okay, here were the adjectives that I said about myself that other people agreed with. They also answered that. Here are the activities that I said about myself, but no one else chose that as an adjective for me. And then here are activities or adjectives that, I did not think that I demonstrated, but multiple other people may have said that I do. And then last but not least, if there are ones that, I did not pick for myself, other people did not pick for me, then that might be something that I could work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one last resource, the social identity wheel and personal identity wheel. This was developed in the multicultural affairs department of, I'm trying to remember where it was. Did I write it down? Northwestern, that's where it was. Yeah, Northwestern University. And it just is a way to kind of identify, here are identities that I feel a lot, and here are identities that I don't feel as much. And like I said, oftentimes privilege is not something that's a felt experience, while oppression can be. And so it just kind of allows you to demonstrate that in an image, and then you can invite, colleagues, mentors, et cetera, to kind of do the same and fill this out for themselves, place themselves along that kind of quadrant of the circle, and identify, is that an identity I put myself really, really close to the center in, as in it's something that I think about all the time? Or is that something that I would just, that's true about me. Maybe it has some impact if somebody else brings it up, but I don't really think about it. So these social identity and personal identity wheels can be a helpful tool. All right, next slide. And I think, a lot of these resources we're going to share out afterwards. And so some of them you'll just have access to kind of look over on your own time. But I think one that I might want to spend, if we spend any time looking at them, Kamal, do you want to share about these ones that are in a couple slides here that you kind of helped compile? Hi, Kamal. Thanks for joining us. As we mentioned, Naomi, the third panelist who kind of helped develop this content, was unavailable today. And so Kamal has graciously joined and is willing to talk just briefly about some of these resources.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kamal Amirnani. I'm a member of the Youth Advisory Council with the RC. And if we're able to advance slides.
I think one more. There you go.
Yeah, one back. Thank you. So this is actually a podcast episode made by TEDx at the University of Ohio. And they bring in community members in order to speak about a specific issue. And this specific podcast was about mentoring the immigrant community. And as a mentor who has a mentee who's an immigrant, I think it's so important to understand that immigrant experience, to know kind of what the biggest challenges that they're going through at the time is, so you can have more targeted and impactful mentoring relationship, and you can provide support in the best ways. And this podcast really highlighted that two of the biggest challenges that immigrant youth face in Columbus are with regards to language and transportation. So just being aware of this can help mentors, be a better mentor and provide better support just through taking the simple action, kind of researching the biggest challenges and getting to know things that may seem trivial, but are so much more difficult for someone who's in a new country for the first time, who has never maybe ridden a bus or isn't able to read the signs. It's a lot more difficult to do things like that. And one of the quotes from this podcast is, "Once I became a mentor, it truly humanized everything that I was hearing in the news, everything that I was passionate about. I think that's truly because I kept an open mind and wanted to learn." And as somebody who is mentoring a immigrant, it's so important to keep an open mind. It's not a one-sided relationship. You're not just helping them kind of integrate into American society, but it's so important for them to see you're interested in their culture as well. And that you're making an intentional effort to learn about what their life is like in the country that they came from, and how you can adjust that, how you can maintain those cultural practices while navigating a new city. And so I highly recommend that you all check out this podcast. It's a really great listen.
Awesome. I think we're coming down to the end. It's about 2:30, Jake. And just in closing, I'll say something I think August may want to just close out. We gave you a lot of information, right? Remember we said from the beginning, is an intention that we give you enough information so that you can pull from the information that was presented and use it in your program as a way that makes sense for you and in a way that you can integrate it seamlessly without necessarily having to change everything about your program. So don't look at these pillars, don't look at the neurodiversity, don't look at the DEI structure, don't look at critical mentoring as I have to do all of these things. It's no, what can I use from the webinar to enhance my program as we move forward. So thank you for your time and thank you for your interest and also the wonderful questions.
Thank you, Dwayne. Thanks, Kamal, for jumping in as well.
Awesome. And a huge thank you. There's been so much gratitude in the chat for all three of you, plus Naomi as well. Even though she wasn't able to be here, she was a huge and core part of planning this webinar and of planning the content. And thank you all again so much for your patience and flexibility with the tech issues. We're going to be posting all of these resources onto the website, and we'll be in touch soon with how you can access that. But again, this was a super, super amazing webinar. Thank you, Dwayne and August and Kamal, for just seamlessly jumping into it, even with everything, and giving us such an incredible presentation that was really so thorough, so in-depth and intentional. For folks who are curious in what we are offering next, you can join us also in December. We have it's a little double feature moment, 2 CMWS webinars in the month of December, and you can join us on December 21st at 1 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern for webinar on opportunities and challenges of advocacy from lived experience. So hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Again, thank you to our presenters and take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Have a great day.
Thank you.